and you're welcome to have a closer look at these pictures. The other thing, I went straight from there to visit a refugee camp in Texas, where some of the folks who had been who were being detained relative to the border issues. We were outside of a place where women were being detained, and it was just mothers in there. Again, another powerful experience. I really appreciated the efforts of the folks to organize that. Also appreciated being able to look up the detention center and see these faces looking out at us. That was a real powerful experience as well. And from what I understand, they were responding to us. They knew what we were doing, because apparently there was some waving that was taking place. But that was part of our Sunday morning Sabbath, and we did return from that to go straight back to work at convention. The most noteworthy issue that was brought up, or the one that got the most news, let me just say that before council, I was fairly convinced that an issue related to a stipend for the President of the House of Deputies was going to be the single biggest issue that we had to deal with. It ended up not being. A great compromise was brought to the floor that agreed that, yes, we do want to pay the President of the House of Deputies, but the stipendiary piece doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we voted in a director's salary for her, and it was very the solution we came to was very reasonable. And my sense, and I'll let somebody from the House of Deputies comment on this later, my sense was the House of Deputies was in the same place as us on that, and that there was general, very positive agreement on that. Now, the one that got the most legs, and the thing that got the most interest, and still gets the most interest, is prayer book revision. You know, let's not kid ourselves. Many of us are still saying, you know, why'd we revise my prayer book? And they're talking about the 28 prayer book. Okay, so let's just go ahead and own that right now. And then the other thing that comes up along with prayer book revision is why. And here is, I'm going to read to you from one of the acts of convention from 2015. And this is for resolution A169. And there was a committee at this convention called Response to Resolution A169. And part of our deputation, Catherine McCormick, actually served on that committee. Margaret, were you on that committee as well? And it reads, resolved that the 78th General Convention in Salt Lake City direct the Standing Commission on Liturgy and Music to prepare a plan for the comprehensive revision of the current Book of Common Prayer and present that plan to the 79th General Convention. And be it further resolved that such a plan for revision utilize the riches of our church's liturgical, cultural, racial, generational, linguistic, gender, and ethnic diversity in order to share common worship. And be it further resolved that the plan for revision take into consideration the use of current technologies which provide access to a broad range of liturgical resources. And be it further resolved that the General Convention requests the Joint Standing Committee on Program, Budget, and Finance to consider a budget allocation of $30,000 for the implementation of this resolution. We start with that last resolve, the $30,000. That was to be budgeted for the work done by the SCLM and others between 2015 and 2018 in preparing two potential resolutions for us, okay? And those two resolutions came to us as a sort of option A and option B. Option A was a comprehensive prayer book revision and really beginning the process of looking at what a new prayer book would look like and what a new prayer book to replace 1979 would look like. Option B was one where we would look at expanding some of the supplemental materials and looking at some ways that we could augment the current prayer book and have some parallel materials that would allow us to continue to work with 79 and not go into a full-blown prayer book revision. Now, here's an important part of that. Option A required a budget of $1.9 million, okay, for 2018 to 2021. Option B required a budget, I think it was, placeholder was 201,000, something of that nature. So those are important pieces of it. Now, it's also important for me to go ahead and state that as soon as a prayer book is authorized, let's just say 1979, when we passed that final piece of legislation that says we got a new prayer book, yay, it is already in the process of revision from that moment moving forward. We never stop revising prayer books and looking at what they're going to need and the potential for how we might need to expand upon that, okay? So prayer book revision, our prayer book is a living organism, if you will. It's something that is always going through that. And all you got to do is look at some of the supplemental materials we already have, okay? You can look at enriching our worship. You can look at some of the other pieces that have been adopted throughout the years that add significance to those things. You can look at the way we often use the baptismal covenant to talk about the stewardship of creation and in other ways. These are all part of the liturgical experience. But these two particular actions, A in particular, is all about moving towards a new prayer book. Now, if we had authorized a new prayer book, would we see it by Christmas time? No, we wouldn't be seeing that till, knock on wood, till probably after I'm retired. And now I'm not retiring anytime soon. It would take several general conventions for us to go through a process to do that. It would take several more general conventions for trial liturgy as well. And it has to be approved, not at one general convention, but two. So, for example, when 1979 was approved, it had to be approved in 1976 first, and then it had to be approved again in 1979, okay? So you can see this is not a simple overnight process, hence 1.9 million. Now, let me tell you my thought on the prayer book revision as I was flying to Austin and as things were beginning. My particular thoughts were, you know, this is a long process. Maybe we should just go ahead and begin it. And as I got more into the discussion, I thought, yeah, let's just go ahead and begin the process of prayer book revision. Why not? But then I had this moment early on in some of our discussions, and really liturgically, and I think some of it may have been hearing Bishop Curry preach when I had an aha moment saying, you know what? Let's not mess with the prayer book right now. And y'all are tired of me using sports analogies, but I'm going to go ahead and use another one right now. I feel like we're in the process of pushing forward in a really positive way as the Episcopal Church right now. And I feel like one of the reasons why is because we got a great, dynamic, presiding bishop who really can walk into rooms and in different places and really energize people. And I felt it's sort of like, here's the football analogy, okay? We got a great running back. Give him the ball 30 times a game. Give him the ball 35 times a game. Don't take the ball away from him and start getting cute, throwing gadget passes and stuff like that. That was my thinking on that. So let's not distract anything from his efforts to be the CEO, Chief Evangelistic Officer. And let's not distract anything in the way by pointing our direction at prayer book revision. And let's just keep pushing forward, bringing others to Christ. That was sort of a visionary moment that I had. And I don't think I was really alone in that in the House of Bishops. I think there were many others who felt very similar responses. Hence, the two different A and B things began to find a whole lot of discussion and a whole lot of, in some of the hearings that Committee for the Response on A169 had listened to, began to sense that we need to do something. And it wasn't until, and honestly, I don't think that we would have concurred on something relative to these two options if it hadn't been rewritten the night before into what we finally got. And what we finally settled on was a resolution that called for the beginning of prayer book revision, but also memorializing, canonizing, if you will, the 1979 Book of Common Prayer as the prayer book of the church. Best analogy that I could think of for doing that is what England has. The 1662 prayer book is still the authorized prayer book of the church, but they also have a series of supplemental materials that govern and dictate and direct their common worship. So that is really probably the best way I can think to describe it. That resolution, or that resolve, amended resolution, came from a number of bishops who worked through the night to get that done. One of them was Andy Doyle, and came to us. I voted for the amended resolution because I felt like that resolution was something I could live with. But then when that amended resolution came to a vote, I voted against prayer book revision. I told you it passed by a voice vote. I don't even think anybody heard my no. That's how clear and resounding it was. But like I said, my reasoning was that I didn't want to have anything distract us from Bishop Curry's ministry and his presence and his evangelistic efforts. That's just me. I like to keep it simple, and I can only stay focused on one thing at a time typically. So that was just me, but I'm very comfortable with what came about. Now, here's a key piece. All that has been proposed with a budget of $200,000. So that's a lot different than that 1.9 million that was originally the placeholder. Okay, so that I think was rattling around in people's heads. I think it's a reasonable compromise. It also, and again, I'll let some of the deputies fill us in on this, but I believe there was also a very clear intention of making sure that we have representation from throughout the church to be part of that revision process and part of the creation of those supplemental materials, and with clear. Making clear and sure that we get people from Province 9, some of the other diverse parts of the church. That was prayer book revision, and now let me move on to marriage rights for the whole church. This one is called B012. It originated in the House of Bishops. It was brought together. I think it was brought by Nick Knisley, who's from Rhode Island, Larry Provenzano from Long Island, and John Bauerschmidt, I believe, from Tennessee. And this is if you know these three people, whose names I just threw out there, they're diverse. I mean, we're talking different sides, not just different sides of the aisle, but sitting on different ends. But anyhow, what they were looking to do with the marriage rights for the whole church was to provide a way for the churches within the diocese of dissenting bishops. Dissenting bishops are the bishops who for conscientious reasons feel unable to authorize same-sex marriages within their diocese and within their churches, to find a way for those churches within those dioceses to offer marriages and blessings for the men and women in those churches. So what that means is, and I'm going to use John Bauerschmidt. He's a friend of mine. He's conscientiously and theologically opposed to same-sex marriage. That's where he is on it. And doesn't believe that he can authorize, because of his conscientious and theological opposition, doesn't believe that he can authorize those marriages and blessings to take place within his diocese. Some of his churches are more on the progressive side of things and have asked, Bishop, can you find a way for us to do this here? And some of those solutions have included up till now, well, yeah, you can go across the state line into Kentucky, you can go down to Mississippi, you can go to some of the other dioceses and they can be married there. They said, but these people are under our pastoral charge. Can we do it here? And he said, no, I can't. No, I can't do that. It's just not where I am. So what this does is this allows for John to tell St. Swithin's, you can proceed taking care of your parishioners, namely those same-sex couples, but I can't oversee that process because of my conscientious objection. So therefore, you're going to need to work with the Bishop of Kentucky to oversee what takes place in your parish, okay? Meaning it takes place in Tennessee, but the Bishop of Kentucky is going to be the one to provide the pastoral care so that priest is getting ready to do the service, and also to adjudicate in the event that it's a Canon 19 situation, which is where someone has been married and divorced. And that's where a bishop has to weigh in on it, because you can see where the conflict might take place for someone who's conscientiously opposed to the weddings, also happen to weigh in on something of that nature. So that was where that rested. Now, one of the pieces in here as well that's important to note is it doesn't take anything away from the rectors in the parishes, okay? A rector in a parish is still, just as they are in any situation, in charge of the liturgical life of that parish. But also as clergy, they are always able to say, no, I cannot do this marriage, okay? So it doesn't take any away from the rector's authority within the parish, but what it does provide is a different episcopal leadership. It's not depot, delegated episcopal pastoral oversight, but it is a different level of pastoral oversight for that parish that wants to proceed with these services. Far from perfect, but it does allow for these marriages to take place within certain dioceses, and does give bishops a way to make sure they don't compromise their own conscientious or theological positions. I'm sorry I've taken so much time. A couple of other really noteworthy things, and I'm just going to really highlight these and let the deputies get a little deeper into the weeds on these. Back up to B012. I saw my notes here. What we got is far from perfect, but I think it's a good way to push forward, and I think it's a great way to encourage discussion, okay, particularly between bishops and clergy, as well as leadership within the parishes. So I think that some of the discussions on investments were fascinating. I wish I could have sat through more of those. Tom Fortner is going to tell you a little bit about that in a minute, and some of the responsible investment piece of things. There was some issues with stewardship of creation. There was within that the liturgical one, there was some recommendation from the Diocese of Connecticut for language that encouraged the stewardship of creation within our baptismal covenant. You know, what a great idea. Is that me? Does that mean I'm taking too long? And also something that's caught a little bit of little bit of interest in the last couple of weeks, because we saw where the suffragan bishop Gail Harris up in Boston has had to make some amends and what have you. Some of the various discussions of the Holy Land in Israel and Palestine as well. Now, I wish I'd been on the floor for those discussions. I was not. I was counting ballots. But there was a lot of energy behind some of those discussions, and I trust some of the deputies are going to be able to give you a little more texture on that. I know what I understand is that Gail said something on the floor that angered some of the Palestinian piece of things. I don't recall exactly, but since that time, amends have been attempted. Let's just put it that way, and so. I will, if any of y'all have any more texture on that, I will allow you to do that. I would like to move on and turn things over to Canon Stevens, and Paul. What I would recommend is that kind of introduce the way you're going to move forward with the House of Deputies piece of things, and then since we're at about 5 minutes, maybe. Take a break after you introduce things, and that'll allow whoever's going to go first to come forward and speak. But thank you for all your support while I was away. Thank you for your confidence in me, and thank you for the opportunity to represent you at in the House of Bishops. I appreciate it, and we will. I'll be back up here at some point to take some questions. So many thanks.
Thank you, Bishop. In addition to the individuals that the Bishop introduced a few moments ago, there were other members of our deputation. There are 5 members who are not able to be with us today. You'll see their names at the bottom of the sheet. They all played an integral part of our work, both prior to heading to Austin and while we were there. And additionally, we had 2 of the members of the deputation that had to resign their positions before General Convention began due to a couple of different reasons. Lee Davis Thames from Holy Trinity in Vicksburg and Danny Metters from St. Patrick's Long Beach both had to resign. And at the last minute, I mean, almost literally the last minute, Brian Ponder, Canon for Administration and Finance in the Diocese, who was one of our deputies, some matters arose on the family front, and he was not able to be with us in Austin, and we missed his presence. So I want to say thank you to everybody on the deputation for your hard work, both before and during General Convention. It was a great group. I'm grateful for all that you have done. We have several folks who are going to drill a little deeper into certain matters, but I wanted to tag off of something that Bishop Sage mentioned about the Me Too movement to give you and talk about that very briefly. In February of this year, the president of the House of Deputies, Gay Jennings, appointed a special House of Deputies Committee on Sexual Harassment and Exploitation. There were some, as I recall, 40 or so members of that committee spread across the church. They divided in subcommittees, and each of these subcommittees presented different resolutions to General Convention for our consideration. And I would say that, to give you an idea, there were over 500 resolutions that were introduced at General Convention. And I don't have a count of how many of those were adopted, but we went through that agenda sometimes in very rapid fashion. But some of the resolutions coming out of that special committee on sexual harassment and exploitation included, I'm just going to give you a very, very brief, and this is not all of those resolutions. A task force for women, truth, and reconciliation will be appointed by presiding bishop and president of the House of Deputies. A resolution was adopted seeking to reduce sexual harassment, assault, and exploitation in the workplace. Certain information that contained on the ministry portfolios through the Office of Transition Ministry, OTM portfolios, will be removed. Specifically, identification of individuals by their gender will be one that will be removed totally. And secondly, also to be removed would be information concerning current compensation. Both of those were in an effort to address the implicit bias that we all have, and certainly the search committees have, hoping that the deployment process would be fairer for everyone. To require training of clergy and bishops, and to establish a task force to develop that training material. A resolution was adopted charging the church with not discriminating in the hiring of clergy and their deployment. There were several amendments that occurred at Title IV. Title IV is the disciplinary process for ordained persons within the church. One of those changes was that there will be a statute of limitations for sexual harassment will be suspended for a 3-year period beginning January 1st of this coming year and extending through December 31st, I guess, of 2021, if I'm counting correctly, for a 3-year period. There were some other changes to Title IV of particular import, in my view. One change that was adopted expands the definition of sexual harassment as used in Title IV, and includes, or will include when it becomes effective January 1st, a provision that it's not okay for clergy to date any member of the church that they serve. There used to be, that provision was not in Title IV previously and will be moving forward. There's also, in 2015, a change was made to Title IV which would allow, or which required people making complaints under the Title IV process to be identified. That was undone this time, so that now during the intake process, until matters move on down the road in the Title IV process, that the identity of complainants, the identity of people making or providing evidence in a Title IV intake or investigation stage cannot be shared with anyone. There is a provision that the Bishop Diocesan, for good pastoral reasons, can make that information available, but that will be a pretty major change. And also, finally, I think very important is that retaliation and is now, or will be in January 1st, will be a Title IV offense, so that if, say, an employee at a church or a member at a church provides information about a clergy person in a Title IV proceeding, and the clergy retaliates in some way, that then will, in and of itself, be a separate Title IV offense. And there's also an amendment to Title IV providing whistleblowers certain protections as they come forward. Altogether, I believe there were about 30 resolutions that the Special Task Force presented. Those are just a few of the ones that were acted on. I would say, in my view, that the church, as it was gathered at General Convention, saw issues of sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, and matters of deployment, and other matters within, kind of highlighted in the Me Too movement as being very serious, and a lot of energy and discussion took place around those issues across the entirety of General Convention. And finally, I would just you can go to generalconvention.org and you can search and by topic, by committee, by number, lots of different ways, and you can see exactly what the resolutions were that were adopted in their final form, and I would encourage you to use that resource. So we're going to move forward. We'll take a break, but we're going to, and just kind of a stretch break, more than, everybody going off in different directions. But when we come back together, we've got deputies who will talk in more detail about several different subject areas and topics. And so let's take just a couple of minutes to stretch, and then we'll jump right in as Dr. Anita George kicks us off.
They're good. How you doing? Now you're at Madison, at Trinity. Are you at Trinity? I was thinking, okay, really? Yeah, I can do that. That's fine. Testing? Jackson clergy have a road. It's set up here. I can go and come back. Hey.
Just wanted to give you a hope.
I saw you from a distance.
I came in last night and then you can kind of wake up and drive.
Tell me, we drove down this morning.
That's a rough ride. When I was in Columbus,
I did it for umpteen years, and it was just fine because most of my meetings were later. But when I had to get up at 5 o'clock, it was stay. I get more comfortable myself. And people sometimes say, oh, I know, you're from Virginia, the National Guard, 400 units, so, you know, it goes nowhere. Does that one on the top lock it or anything? Yeah, that's fine. I've often thought, you know. Oh, okay. You stole it from me. Yes, indeed. I hope you write it in your will that as long life it will be. And in some ways,
I know that you're nervous about.
Yeah, let's get the other not so positive thing was we got a letter, you know, appreciation for our service and and that was nice. And then one day I wanted to get an address for one of our executive members that I want a phone number or something. I went to the extranet. I'm cut off. I'm totally cut. That did not feel good. But it did. It made it real. It made it real. But you know, I'll get over that. And I'll get over all of it. But when you've done this thing for 9 years, that's 40. Yeah. So it'll take a little time. And I'm nosy. I want to know what they're doing, and because I know I can predict who's going to do what, and I want to know who's going to get in there.
Are you excited to get
I don't really know them. But the other part of that is to trust the process. Trust it. And trust that all of it is out of all our hands when it comes right down to it, you know. Well, I'll tell you what did happen. You may have heard me talking to David that night about wanting to get away from all these responsibilities and finish some writing to do. Were you in with us then?
I don't remember you talking about writing.
Anyway, I've talked about it a lot. I just haven't done it. But we were driving down this morning on the PB PRN.
Yeah.
This is PRN. MPB, I get them all. And they were interviewing a woman who recently published a book. She's from Mississippi and lives somewhere else now. And she was back in Mississippi to promote her book. It'll come to me. But my point is, she's telling us the books. There are, of course, the differences. Sure. But darn it, that's what I was supposed to publish years ago. But it's done. I mean, so much of listening to that, I feel like maybe it's stories were told. I don't know. It's different. It's very different.
Listening to a quote, her name they said something about.
Excuse me. Oh. If
So,
I want to thank Bishop Sage, Canon Stevens, Dean Pogue, and all of you in the Diocese of Mississippi for giving me the opportunity to represent you for a total of 7 general conventions spanning 21 years, from Denver to Austin, from Minnesota to Colorado, plus some other sites. I am grateful for the privilege of serving you and our church in local and international contexts. The 79th General Convention of our Episcopal Church was particularly meaningful for me this year in several ways. I can't describe what it felt like to be a part of the first General Convention where presiding bishop and primate Michael Bruce Curry presided as leader of the Episcopal Church. It was a lifetime high point for me. And also to witness a General Convention while scattered over numerous Austin city blocks was absolutely, almost absolutely, paperless. iPads were the order of the day. And all hats off to Secretary Canon Micah Barlow and that super General Convention staff. Finally, the actions of General Convention 2018 were thematic throughout nearly every aspect of the work of this body. These were observed through resolutions, special programs, and the accord of deputies and bishops and legislative bodies. They all bore the imprint of the now familiar themes of pillars of evangelism, care of creation, racial reconciliation, all of these foundational to becoming the beloved community. These pillars also were a core component of the construction of the 2019-2021 budget process. For me, also, an important common thread in the series of resolutions on racial reconciliation were the extended discussions, both in and out of legislative committees and on and off the floor of the House of Deputies. Some were extremely difficult. Many were community building, and still others were left open-ended to be continued, as it were. As I looked at resolutions related to racial reconciliation or racism or diversity, I got up to a count of 30, more than 30, that contained obvious implications. And then there were those that were not so obvious. But in my few minutes today, I'll just highlight a few of the resolutions related to racial reconciliation that I believe will have direct and significant impact on the ministry of racial reconciliation moving forward into the next triennium. Resolution A043, titled Clarify and Update the Mandate of ECCAR. It's an acronym for the Executive Council Committee on Anti-Racism. By way of this resolution, ECCAR is attempting to clarify its mandate to be in accord with the church's leadership in the Jesus movement and becoming the beloved community, while maintaining its original mandate to work towards eliminating the sin of racism from the life of the church. Through its amended role, ECCAR would recommend best practices for dismantling racism training, collect information from dioceses and provinces regarding successes, lessons learned, and challenges. This work would be done with an eye for compliance with the General Convention resolution that was passed in 2000, numbered B049, which required anti-racism training for lay and ordained persons. Annual findings will be the responsibility of ECCAR to submit to Executive Council on each year. And for informational purposes, members, for your information, ECCAR members are appointed by the presiding officers, and generally there is one representative from each province, in addition to other persons at the discretion of the presiding officers. You may remember that for at least one triennium, I chaired that committee at the national, international level. A044, establishing an anti-racism racial reconciliation certification framework, building capacity for the beloved community. In essence, what this resolution does is to try to identify, it indeed does identify core components that should comprise every anti-racism training project, program, or activity. Over the years, different provinces, parishes, dioceses have either not done the work at all or have done the work in to various degrees, and rightfully so, adapted the training to the particular geographical or cultural contexts. Not always, however, have the goals of our letters, pastoral letters from the bishops, been recognized in those programs. This resolution attempts to say, design your programs as you see fit to your particular context, but be certain that you include certain core components, and those components are listed in the resolutions, so that people have the freedom to design their own programs and also fulfill the intent of resolution of 2000 B049. The training must be grounded in scripture and spiritual formation with liturgy, preferably Eucharist when possible. The training must proclaim the dream of the beloved community. It must also include an historical component of the Episcopal Church's role in slavery, segregation and discrimination of people of color, the doctrine of discovery, and the separation of indigenous children from their families through participation in the boarding school system, and the church's responses to racism through the years. The training must also tell the truth about church and race. There will also be a didactic or content component that includes baptismal covenant, elements of power, class, race, racism, internalized racial privilege or oppression, implicit racial bias, intercultural awareness and communication, becoming co-conspirators in dismantling racism, and envisioning reconciliation. It must work toward repairing the breach. It must form respectful communication groups, Bible studies, and other activities, and it must practice the way of love, as our presiding bishop has outlined for us. I guess that the most memorable resolution is the one numbered D002, funding the beloved community. That particular resolution came through Legislative Committee number 9, Racial Reconciliation and Justice. And it initially, the resolution in its first form went forward asking for $1 million for the establishment of grants at the local levels so that the work would begin in the parishes, in the dioceses, in the provinces, and then work up to the church staff who work with this kind of thing. People on the committee thought that they weren't asking for enough money to do this, that this was quite ambitious, so the number changed. And by the time it got to the, I believe by the time it got to the House of Bishops, the request was for $5 million. By the time it went through the houses and then got to PBNF, Program Budget and Finance, $750,000 was approved for this work. Supporters of the resolution are related, and I had this not together here. Anyway, they are supporters of the resolution, celebrate this adoption because now they say local congregations, dioceses can do the work of racial reconciliation in their own ways and can put these forward as models for the rest of the church to follow. I think I'll just briefly talk about one more resolution, and this was a resolution that B004, and it was encouraging the language of dismantling racism and racial healing, justice, and reconciliation. This was the final title. It was not submitted with that particular title. Initially, there were those who believed that the term anti-racism was spiritually imprecise. They felt that they sought to ask task forces, commissions, committees, parishes, centers, and individuals in the Episcopal Church to refrain from using the term anti-racism to designate or describe any portion of their work, and that the substitute term to describe such work would be racial healing, justice, and reconciliation. This desired term would have been in keeping with the subtitle of a center that was familiar to many people. Following some extremely difficult conversations, among many groups, the resolution was amended to encourage and continue the work and to address institutional and systemic racism while acknowledging the need to also work for healing, justice, and reconciliation. The resulting amended resolution represents much discussion, as you can imagine, compromise, and lots of prayer. Perhaps it's a model of reconciliation. Please remember, as you've been reminded, that you can go to generalconvention.org and find all of these resolutions. You will find the original format of those resolutions and what the final resolution looks like and what the status is. You also, again, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to pursue much of the work I have been called to do within our church communities and our structures. I am deeply grateful for all the opportunities you have afforded me. Thank you very much.
Marian Fortner from Trinity in Hattiesburg, and I served as one of your clergy deputies at General Convention. And I, like Anita, want to say thank you because it's been a real privilege. This was a very good General Convention. I have only served one other time, which was in 2012. And just by comparison, I just want to say I feel so good about where the church is. Bishop Sage talked about our new leader, Michael Curry, and just the feeling in the room was so positive going forward. And one observation I had was that it seemed to be hearing more diverse voices. Lot of diversity in the room and a lot of diversity being heard. So with that, my task is to speak to the prayer book and liturgical revision. I did not serve on this committee, but I was fascinated by this process, and the bishop has already sort of, pardon the sports analogy, teed us up for that so very nicely. So I'm not going to go back into the history, but let me hit a few things that might get lost in the big prayer book revision before I get to that. And that is this. We added Thurgood Marshall, Pauline Murray, and Florence Lee Tim Oy to Lesser Feasts and Fasts for 2018. Thurgood Marshall, of course, was the first African-American on the U.S. Supreme Court. Pauli Murray was the first African-American female priest being ordained in 1977, also a civil rights activist. And Florence Lee Tim Oy was the first female priest in the Anglican Communion out of China. So we will be commemorating them on the new calendar. We, let's see, the use of the Book of Occasional Services will continue. The use of Lesser Feasts and Fasts will continue. There was some attempt to kind of consolidate all of these things with Holy Women, Holy Men that just got very confusing. And so we sent that back to SCLM to bring that kind of together. But rest assured that all of those can continue to be used in our parishes. All right. A068 is the plan for the revision of the Book of Common Prayer. This is the one that finally passed of the ones that were put forward. It did move back and forth between the houses, and we could have done a lot of different things. First, the House of Deputies was working hard to make a lot of amendments to the proposal that we revised the prayer book. And frankly, my feeling was I was quite proud of the types of amendments we were making because they were grounded. They were to preserve our the Chicago Lambeth Quadrilateral and things of that nature. So, but what ultimately came back from the House of Bishops was the resolution that Bishop Sage described. And I'm just going to use a real via media description of that. I think we made a conservatively progressive move. We are anchored by memorializing the prayer book. And so the ground is not going to shift beneath our feet so much. And for those who remember adopting that prayer book, that may come as very good news. And yet, we have created a path where we can begin to look at different ways that we can worship, different language that's still within the purview of that prayer book and certainly authorized by a general convention. This resolution, and I do encourage you to go to generalconvention.org, look under virtual binder, go to resolutions, and look up A068 for the exact language. This also creates a task force for ways to enhance the current prayer book so that it resonates with a diverse body. And that task force will include diverse voices. It leaves a little question in my mind as to the role of SCLM, which is our really official standing committee and standing committee on liturgy and music. But I hope that they will have a hand in that in some way, a voice in that. Now, the piece that the deputation discussed, and we really got a little excited about this, including the bishop. One paragraph charges the bishops to engage worshiping communities in experimentation and the creation of alternative texts to offer to the wider church, and that each diocese be urged to create a liturgical commission to collect, reflect, teach, and share these resources with this new committee that's been created to look at prayer book enhancement is what I'm going to call it. I get this image that we're creating a library of liturgies, and it might be something like that. What the energy that we felt in the deputation was coming back to Mississippi and gathering a commission of voices that have an interest in this and ways that we might move together and look at the grounding of the theology in the Book of Common Prayer of 1979, and maybe places where we can move forward in language and things of that nature. I'm going to tag, one other thing, A070 provides for the translation of the Book of Common Prayer. This is something I didn't know, but the Spanish translation of the Book of Common Prayer is literally word for word. Now, there's a way to translate, and it's called a dynamic equivalent, so that you're translating it in a way that's artful, in a way that's interpretive, and not simply word for word, so that the meaning, the deeper meaning, is carried into the translation. So that resolution was passed as well, and that it will be translated into three languages: Spanish, French, and Haitian Creole. So that will be moving forward. I want to tag something that Paul Stevens covered very well, and that was the task force on sexual exploitation and sexual harassment in the church, because I believe it was that body that came forward with a proposed alternative to prayers A, B, and D. Wasn't that correct? Okay. And it did pass both the House and I believe the House of Bishops to allow for what they're calling expansive language. And I would add gender balanced language probably. And so that has been authorized by your General Convention as well to be used. I'm not sure if it's a starting date of Advent 1, but certainly in the coming months. So that's all I have. Again, I want to thank everybody as well for sending me.
Is it appropriate to make a comment or bring up a concern that I have that I've not heard addressed so far? I want to thank all the delegates, including the dean of the delegates, for their work, for y'all's work. But I must say, one thing disappointed me, and that was that I could not see much forward movement in the church's ministry to gay and lesbian people, insofar as if any right is there a proposed right for the union of gay and lesbian people equivalent to the solemnization of matrimony? I haven't heard that. And I understand there was no official approval of any such right. And that disappointed me because I see our church as being very progressive there. And, you know, for Episcopalians, when something makes it into the red prayer book, it's really accepted in our church. And, you know, it has to be read.
Okay.
And if you use gold, you know, edges for the prayer book, that's even better. But I remember Bishop Allen doing the days and the trial liturgies and the zebra book. I'm sure there are people present. And the green book and all that. And how Bishop Allen said at one point, at last we're going to have a prayer book that will be a red prayer book and will look like a prayer book. And I think psychologically that he was saying that there is a sign of acceptance. You know, when something gets into the prayer. I can't imagine, I have never had a request for marriage between persons of different gender, though I have tried to get a little information on such and some sample services. I think there's several floating around the church. I'm struggling with this. Is anything you can help me understand? What was progress there?
Okay. I'll tell you what that looked like for me, and then Margaret McClarty will be addressing that specifically.
Okay, good.
And the bishop certainly may want to weigh in on that. But your question is, what was any progress made on marriage for those seeking a same-sex marriage?
Same gender.
Yes, and moving that into the prayer book. No. Not particularly. I mean, not in the way that the form that you're looking for. But what I heard the church do was, I heard voices on both sides seeking a way forward together with compromise. And so I remember particularly a lesbian priest who stood on the floor of the House of Deputies and recalled the story of her ordination that the bishop said, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago to her. I can ordain you, but I'm going to have to find you another diocese. And she said while it was compromising to her then, she found the diocese, I can't remember, I think maybe it was Newark, where she was able to practice her priesthood and be a full priest. It was a compromise, but for her, she was seeing that as a way forward, and that sometimes that's needed for now. The compromise that we saw was that those bishops that Bishop Sage described, who just cannot in their good conscience authorize the blessing of a marriage, same-sex marriage, in their diocese, couples now have a way forward in that situation to get married in their home church. Of course, their priest has to approve it, but they can get married. Am I going beyond?
I think you're talking about, we know that the marriage can take place. I think you want to see a document. So
And-
there are trials.
But that was sort of the balance of the compromise, that it can happen. It's not yet in the prayer book. But there are authorized versions, yes.
Well, I think in
But
this
you're right, the
diocese-
gilded prayer book says something.
Well, I didn't mean to say anything negative, but it is, you know, sometimes we take 3 steps forward and then go 4 back. You know, that's,
I don't know that we actually look forward back.
the
intent in the new prayer book is always a driving factor behind the new prayer book is an inclusion of a marriage rite that would be accessible to people, both heterosexual.
Yeah.
And so, but with the resolution as it so stands, written by Bishop Doyle, that prayer book may or may not be coming up. But we still have authorized our blessing, you will be a blessing, that is still available for people of any gender preference. And you can also use the prayer book office with changing the pronouns. That's available.
Sam, I mean, Morris, I think you might need to come to the mic.
Let's let Morris finish answering this question, and then we'll move on with Ed Sisson. Go ahead.
I believe that the question is whether or not a new prayer book would be authorizing a same sex, same gender marriage, and that is a driving factor behind any new prayer book that the Episcopal Church. That was pretty. It was pretty universal that a new prayer book would include such a liturgy. Since we have not actually created a concrete new prayer book, we can't make a statement on what is in it because it's not available yet. But right now we're taking in, that's what the diocesan committee is supposed to do, is help take in bulletins, how you are doing different liturgies, and send that off to the commission that the new resolution has created, which will then send them to the SCLM, I believe. So I think that it's still moving forward for same-sex marriages and blessings. However, you're not going to see any concrete information on that. A new prayer book takes a lot of time. One of the things that I realized is my son, who's 3, will be in high school by the time we have a new prayer book. So no, we haven't made progress, but yes, we're in the process of making progress, I think.
Good morning. My name's Ed Sisson. I'm from Oxford, St. Peter's, and this is the 6th General Convention that I've attended. And I too would like to thank the people of the Diocese of Mississippi for the real honor and privilege of representing you there. 4 of those General Conventions I've served on the Legislative Committee on World Mission. I will turn to World Mission, but I wanted to say a little more about Cuba before I do that. And resolution A238. On January 1st, 1959, I was 16 years old, getting ready to be 17, and a junior in high school. Early that morning, Fulgencio Batista got on a plane with 40 of his family and closest friends and flew off to the Dominican Republic. On the second plane, he carried the treasury of the state of Cuba, $300 million with him to tide him over. A day later, on the second, Ernesto Che Guevara and Camilo Cienfuegos arrived in Havana at the head of 2 columns of Cuban revolutionaries, and 6 days later, on the 8th, Fidel Castro himself arrives. They set up a government, and the relationship with the United States steadily went downhill from that point and reached perhaps the worst culmination in April with the aborted CIA-sponsored Bay of Pigs invasion. And on December of that year, when Fidel Castro came out and said, "I'm a Marxist-Leninist and we're going to be a Marxist-Leninist state," and began repression of, among other things, churches. In 1965, the then missionary bishop, Episcopal missionary bishop to Cuba, died, and the House of Bishops was faced with the question of what do we do? Do we elect a new missionary bishop? In 1966, when they finally voted, 75% of Cuban Episcopalians were living in the United States. The Episcopal Church had limited resources, and it was pretty clear to the House of Bishops that for them to appoint a missionary bishop in Cuba was going to be adverse propaganda that the Castro government could use against those people who had stayed there. So the bishops did vote not to send a new missionary bishop, but to dissolve the relationship with Cuba and the church, which was predominantly in the United States, and to put them under a council, a metropolitan council consisting of the primate of Canada, the Archbishop of the West Indies, and a representative from the Central American Diocese, later to be substituted with our presiding bishop. In the early days, the church sent through Canada funding for the church in Cuba, but as the budget got tight in the United States, that ceased to be done. But we still, the Church Pension Fund, an independent entity in New York, continued to pay pensions for those people who were retired clergy. Of course, since the relationship was dissolved, the clergy that came on board after 1966 did not have pension benefits. Pension benefits were paid through Canada until China does everything. through Canada until the Patriot Act made it difficult to export dollars to Cuba. In the 90s, things began to loosen up a little bit. The Cuban government became more accepting of religion and religious groups. And it was anticipated at the 2003 convention that along with Venezuela and Puerto Rico, that Cuba would be received back into the church. But I think at that time that didn't happen, partially because they wanted the option of later becoming independent, an independent Anglican church. And that became an issue, and they withdrew their request. In 2015, they were present. Bishop Griselda was present at General Convention and spoke with people, and the people of Cuba who she represented indicated that they were ready and willing to come back and wanted to come back into the fold. And so a special committee was set up, and this resolution A238 was a result of the work of that special commission. It welcomed them back. The bishops apologized. I personally didn't really think they needed to apologize, but politically they needed to apologize because the Cubans did not see the events in the same way that certainly that I did. The resolution also addressed the issue of the pension, as Bishop Sage has said, and it also asked that individuals, congregations, and dioceses support the new Diocese of Cuba with their prayers, and also seek material ways in which they could work with their Cuban counterparts at the diocesan and local level there. They still have some hoops to jump through. They're hoops that was set up, and I think they're exactly the same ones that were required of Venezuela and Puerto Rico, and they have to do with bringing their constitution and canons into agreement with the constitution and canons of the church, submitting a parochial report, and there's some other requirements. But at General Convention, upon the passage, the concurrence by the House of Deputies of the bishop's approval of this resolution, not only was Bishop Griselda seated, but the deputation was seated in the House of Deputies as well. So we now, pending, I guess, the certification of the executive committee, we have a new diocese. There are 112 of us of dioceses. Interestingly, in the World Mission Committee, we had a resolution that we actually wrote, A215. Venezuela finds itself, the church in Venezuela finds itself much in the same position as the church in Cuba did in 1959, 60, etc. It was an interesting and challenging task to write a resolution indicating our support for the people of Venezuela, both those in Venezuela and those who have chosen to leave Venezuela, and not provide ammunition that the government could use to perhaps punish the church, local church, and the local people. So we ended up sort of lamenting the political and social and economic situation and chaos in Venezuela, but tried not to cast blame on any entity or group of peoples there. Incidentally, all of the resolutions presented by the World Mission Committee were placed on the consent calendar, which meant that they weren't discussed on the floor of either the House of Deputies or the House of Bishops. DO 57 came through our committee, and it asked for an additional $250,000 be dedicated to the Young Adult Service Corps and the Episcopal Volunteers in Mission. I would like to say that all of that goes to funding new volunteers in mission or youth going abroad, but a lot of it will be eaten up by increased health and insurance costs, transportation costs. We've been benefited by this program. I know from Oxford University, we've had at least 2 students in recent years who upon graduation went to, I believe one went to Honduras and one went to Tanzania, and there may be others that I'm not aware of. The resolution also calls for continued support by local congregations and dioceses. We also asked that they create a gap year program for students who are between college and high school and college, and who want to serve the church. That's dependent, it passed both houses, but it's dependent upon funding by the executive committee. The money was not included in the budget. Resolution A208 actually came out of Governance and Structure Subcommittee, but it asked for a reinstatement of the World Standing Commission on World Mission. We, the members of that legislative committee, got there, and there were no resolutions. We thought we were going to just be able to go out and enjoy ourselves in Austin. They did show up, but none of them came out of the subcommittee of the executive committee, which had taken over those responsibilities. And it was our feeling, and shared by Governance and Structure, that World Mission, if we're going to call ourselves the Domestic and Foreign Missionary Society, we needed to do some strategizing about foreign missions. Who knows what will happen with that, whether it will be funding will be found. I did receive a notification asking if I would be interested in serving on that committee, among others. I probably won't be chosen, but I still was asked, which tells me that at least they're going to have a cadre of people they can choose from should they decide, the executive committee, find the money to fund that. Immigration. Obviously, a number of the resolutions were in reaction to the separation of parents and their children, and address that issue. And they frame it in terms of being a traumatizing and inhumane treatment of these people. Other of the resolutions on immigration harken back to a 2009 resolution in which the General Convention called for a reform of our immigration policy. So at least for 9 years now, the church has been on record that the system is broken, we need to change it. Some of the other resolutions, and I'm not giving you numbers, outlined what the church sees as humane policy with respect to those. I've already mentioned keeping the children and their parents together, but it also access to legal aid, access to social services, access to health services would be included as well. Ensure safety, security. Resolution C009 called for, it's entitled something about being a sanctuary church. But rather than suggesting that a congregation would declare itself a sanctuary church, it focuses more on a broader sense of sanctuary, which is ask people to be cognizant of these people who are scheduled to be deported, and work with them to help them get legal aid, to get health care, and all of those things that we would consider as basic human rights. Underlying a lot of the arguments about immigration were biblical injunctions to care for and honor the stranger in our midst. And they had a wonderful poster published originally in 1937 by the Diocese of Southern Ohio, which has a picture of Joseph and Mary with the child, Mary on the back of the donkey, and saying, we were refugees too. Thank you.
We are almost out of time, so let me just say that anyone who needs to leave at noon, please by all means do. I I've got until 1 o'clock for another meeting, and so I will gladly stick around after our noon time to answer any questions. I might come up after that fact, but I know there's a couple more folks that have reports from the deputation, so I'd like to make sure that we provide space for that. So, Paul, it was Tom Fortner?
Thank you. This was I'm Tom Fortner I was a lay deputy, and I'm from Trinity in Hattiesburg. This was my first general convention, and so as you can imagine, there was a steep learning curve for me. But let me say this. I learned two things right away. First of all, the Episcopal Church is sticking to its long-held tradition of a diverse, has diverse an amount of opinions that you can imagine. That's how many people there are that are Episcopalian. And the second is the tradition of actively stating your opinion. That's still alive and well in the Episcopal Church, and it was proven to me in General Convention. I was on the Legislative Committee for Stewardship and Socially Responsible Investing. That is a little misleading for a lot of us. I've been involved in stewardship for a number of years, but the stewardship that I'm used to is parish stewardship campaigns, which is about giving and about the parish collecting monies and for the right reasons. This was more of stewardship in the sense of caring for creation and caring for the assets with which the church is entrusted, and socially responsible investing of those assets. Unbeknownst to me, prior to General Convention, the Episcopal Church, as that corporation is defined, has several hundreds of millions of dollars that it invests. Church Pension Group, which is a separate corporation, has $3 or $4 billion, which is invest. Now, those are general numbers that I'm giving you, but that's a lot of money. And with that amount of money, there is a responsibility. And the Episcopal Church actively engages that responsibility, is the best way to put it. So some of the, and I'll give you an example of that, which I had never known about, but when apartheid was being challenged in South Africa, it was, and I believe it was presiding Bishop Hines, I think that was his name, stood up on the floor of General Motors at a stockholders meeting and made a motion for General Motors to divest itself of its investments in South Africa. And General Motors did eventually do that, and it made a huge difference in the removal of that regime in South Africa. That's what is called socially responsible investing. In other words, stockholder involvement in a company in which the stockholder owns enough stock to make such a motion or to bring such an issue to the floor. So that's one of the issues that's being addressed at General Convention, as well as divestment of companies that General Convention does not agree, with whom General Convention has a disagreement about policy. For instance, fossil fuel companies. So there was a lot of discussion and resolutions about whether divestment was an option for the Episcopal Church that should be followed in certain companies, and with fossil fuel companies, that some resolutions were passed that encouraged divestment of General Convention monies or Church Pension Group monies from fossil fuel companies that did not invest a certain percentage of their budget in the development of renewable energy sources. There were also resolutions that asked for or recommended shareholder engagement in companies that did not um, that had policies that we as Episcopalians do not agree with. For instance, we are investing in gun manufacturers with the idea that we will encourage those manufacturers to make their products less available to criminal enterprises or to criminal acts. That gets real tricky, and there's a real balancing act in there. But that is the policy of General Convention at this point: is to engage companies, gun manufacturer companies, through shareholder motions. So we invest in those. On the other hand, we are trying not to invest or divest in fossil fuel companies that don't try to follow at least some policy interest of the Episcopal Church. The other area that got a little bit of heated, and the bishop did mention this, is the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And I can tell you that what I learned about that is that it is extremely complicated and very nuanced, and it's pretty difficult to do one thing without offending another side, or to work on that side without offending another side. But what isn't obvious to everybody is that the Episcopal Church years ago affirmed through resolution at General Convention the absolute right of Israel to exist as a sovereign nation in the boundaried lands that were originally established for Israel. It also, through General Convention resolution, has in the past also recognized the right of the Palestinians to have their sovereign country in the lands that were originally established for Palestine. Now, it's not nearly as simple as what I just said, but be that as it may, over the course of the last 40 years, Israel now occupies some of the Gaza Strip in the West Bank. That's originally determined to be Palestinian homeland. Israel occupies that because when it doesn't occupy that, it finds itself and its very existence threatened it finds its existence threatened and finds that necessary. The Episcopal Church's position is that they both have the sovereign right to their boundary countries, but we do not approve of human rights abuses in the West Bank or Gaza by Israeli forces, or vice versa. So it is a policy, or by resolution, the Episcopal Church encourages. There was a move to divest of ownership in companies that profit from the Israeli occupation of the West Bank or the Gaza Strip. That idea can be extremely volatile for some of our membership who very, very decidedly support Israel. Or it can be very volatile for some of our membership who decidedly support Palestine. So it's almost it's a political situation that is extremely difficult to resolve. But what happens is there are huge mutual funds, large investment opportunities, and it's very difficult to know, for instance, your mutual funds, what do they invest in? Do they invest in companies that profit from the Israeli occupation of the West Bank? Do they not profit in that? And so it's the policy of the Episcopal Church through a couple of resolutions to encourage divestment in fossil fuel companies that don't pursue renewable energy options, to invest and engage in stockholder action in gun manufacturers, to invest in in companies that invest in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip, but do not support any type of human rights abuses, because those do happen in that area. And I think those were the big topic issues as far as socially responsible investing was concerned. Okay, Marvin?
Hey there, thank you so much. My name's Margaret McLarty. I'm a parishioner here at St. Andrew's Cathedral, and this was I participated in 8 of the last 9 general conventions, and 6 as a part of the deputation, and some as part of the worship committee. I think general convention is a fabulous experience. It gathers the church together every 3 years. I know we talk about the legislative part, which of course is the primary work of this triennial meeting, but it's very important that we do other things also at general convention, and I participate in a lot of that. But we get to see each other, and it's very good to do that. And as we talk about marriage rights, which is my conversation, I think Tom also brings up a very good point. When someone says, "Oh, I'm for socially responsible investing," or "I'm for prayer book revision," it means different things to different people. There are many people who want the prayer book to use gender neutral language in the prayers, and there are many people who want the references to the Creator to be feminine as well as masculine. So once again, there are so many things that are going on in terms of prayer book revision. The marriage rights, there are already alternative liturgies for those, or accepted liturgies. So I want to assure you in your question that the vote to have marriage rights was 99 in favor and 3 against within the clergy order, and 101 to 5 against in the lay order. So, that is just overwhelming support for inclusive of same gender marriages. There's also a lot of inclusion for someone identifying as binary, not identifying with a gender. And so there's a lot of movement in the church to support that as well. It's just that, and technically, according to the resolution, this will become effective Advent 1. So in other words, this is how a legislative body addresses these pastoral issues. So on December, the first week in December, the bishops in all these states can, authorize no one needs authorization. The churches can just do these same gender marriages, except in 7 dioceses. So 7 are the number of bishops who have chosen to ask for alternative oversight, episcopal oversight. Are there any questions up to that point about that? Our diocese is a wonderful example of working together. We meet every day at noon, have lunch, go over all the legislative issues. We are kind of an example to the rest of the church about how well we get along. And no one comes and says, "You have to vote on this." We discuss the issue, and then everybody goes and votes their conscience when they're on the floor. We do have a Mississippi dinner, and we include all the Mississippians that are there. The Episcopal Church women are there, and they come to Mississippi dinner, as well as anyone who's ever served in the diocese who wants to come to the dinner. In the worship, I want to speak to another thing that we're trying to overcome in terms of the prayer book and printing out these services. Many churches and general convention this time and last time had all of the services on your iPhone or your iPad. They were not printed bulletins. That saves thousands and thousands of dollars. So that speaks again to technology coming in the church, how we can be responsive to these various liturgies. And that's why I think they're not going to print big, heavy, and spend millions of dollars at this particular time, because they want the presiding bishop to go forth with his message of love, inclusion, and revival. And I will tell you, the one thing that the bishop did not mention when he talked about the big revival was at the end of the service, you were invited to go to one of the 20 prayer stations in the back of the church and commit your life to Christ. And we've heard that in this area before. It is frequently done in other denominations. So it was a little shock to a lot of people who had never seen an altar call before, but we had one at General Convention. Also, the exhibit hall is fabulous, and I brought y'all all these seeds because this was something that Episcopal Relief and Development gave out, and it's healing for a hurting world, and they want us all to plant these seeds and have sustainable food and increase honeybees.
Hello, my name is Ben Robertson. I am honored to serve as the rector of the Chapel of the Cross in Madison, and it is also my honor to be an alternate deputy to this General Convention. I have served as an alternate before in previous dioceses that I've served, but was very grateful for the generosity of the deputation here in Mississippi to actually go and participate in many ways, and it's great to be with you here today. I have just one small thing to talk about, and that is a piece of legislation that was passed at this General Convention regarding compensation for the President of the House of Deputies, which sounds incredibly exciting. But so I will try to make it as exciting as possible. As you know, or as you probably well know, but in case anyone doesn't, General Convention is a bicameral legislature, two bodies, a House of Bishops containing all the bishops, that is led by the presiding bishop, Michael Curry, and then a House of Deputies, which is all of the deputations from all of the dioceses, and that is led by a president. The president of the House of Deputies is a priest. Her name is Gay Clark Jennings. She lives in Ohio. And up until the 1960s, the president of the House of Deputies was very much a ceremonial role. That person only functioned during General Convention itself. There were no responsibilities before General Convention or after General Convention. But after, I believe it was 1965, the president of the House of Deputies, they were elected not only for the convention itself, but for the entire 3 years afterwards. And that person's role became more and more complex, serving on executive council, which, as the bishop mentioned, is kind of the presiding bishop's vestry, so to speak, serving on other boards, traveling around the church, speaking in various events. It became very much a full-time job. And so over the years, different pieces of legislation have been introduced to give that person some amount of compensation for the work they were doing. There was some concern that this was setting up some kind of power play between the president of the House of Deputies and the presiding bishop, who would be the true head of the church. And so as a compromise, a way to not confuse those two offices, what the convention passed was a resolution that authorized what are called director's fees to compensate the president of the House of Deputies, meaning that these are director's fees being reimbursements for expenses that are incurred, whether that be time spent, expertise given, travel, lodging, what have you. You'll often hear director's fees mentioned in corporate America where people who serve on corporate boards are received directors' fees, but they don't receive a salary. And so it was passed that Gay Jennings and future presidents of the House of Deputies will receive these directors' fees to compensate them for the large amount of work that now goes into being the president of the House of Deputies. It was expected to be a very contentious issue, but because of that compromise language, it was not. And so, go team. Yeah.
Hi, I am Morris Thompson. I am the rector of the Episcopal Church of the Mediator in Meridian, Mississippi, and I am the last person getting up here to speak, so y'all be overjoyed. I am grateful. I was grateful to be a part of such a well-seasoned team. This was my first general convention, and it is a whirlwind. And so I was grateful to have so many people who really showed me the ropes and did it so well. Canon Stevens asked me to speak on the impairment resolutions, specifically DO57, DO58, and DO59. A little backstory to these resolutions. In 2015, General Convention formed what is called the Commission on Leadership and Impairment. Their charge was, and I quote, to explore the canonical, environmental, behavioral, procedural dimensions of matters involving serious impairment of individuals serving as leaders in the church, with special attention to issues of addiction and substance abuse. The formation of this commission in 2015 was an acknowledgement that our church as a whole does not have the necessary outlets to help name, report, address, and treat clergy impairment. In the commission's report to General Convention, I think it was report 4, they stated that unnamed and unaddressed impairment of leaders causes damage beyond the body of Christ. The commission has discovered that in many ways and instances, church polity has impeded the ability of the church to assess, intervene, and treat impairment for people and take care of the community that is injured. So these 3 resolutions seek to address this urgent issue in our churches. In DO57, the Executive Council was charged with creating a training program with respects to alcohol, substance abuse, and other forms of addiction. The resolution even suggests using training materials already provided by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration. That will be at no cost to the church. This training process will be mandatory for all clergy, both lay, deacon, and bishops, as well as anyone in the ordination process. I'd like to add that I think that it could also be a helpful thing for us to have for our vestries as well. This training has 3 goals: to inform the clergy and those seeking ordination on prior resolutions of General Convention regarding impairment, and then recognizing impairment, and then providing tools to increase clergy, those involved with clergy impairment. In DO58, the presiding bishop is recommended to establish a team of advisors or consultants to serve as a resource on alcoholism, substance abuse, and other forms of addiction. They would help the church provide a rapid response to issues of questionable impairment. They would assist clergy or other individuals concerned with confidential advice, and they would provide a system to help those who are in recovery. This resolution is essentially building upon our church's medicine cabinet to help those navigate these difficult issues of addiction, both for the church and for the clergy. And finally, in DO59, the Executive Council and House of Bishops is charged with evaluating their policies and practices in regards to alcohol, substance misuse, and other forms of addiction. This is in order to help promote a healthy environment for all national church gatherings, as well as any gathering of any commission, committee, or board meeting on behalf of the Episcopal Church. And I think this is sound advice for our church, and I know that it's often been in place for many of the different parishes within our diocese and other dioceses as well. Finally, in this resolution, there's a recommendation that Credo, if you don't know, it's a clergy kind of holistic wellness retreat provided by Church Pension Group, that they would develop a program to help its participants explore their relationship to alcohol or other forms of addiction. I think it's important to state that all of these, with the exception of D059, were on the consent calendar, meaning that they have overwhelming, they believe that this has overwhelming support, that this is really where the church needs to go, and there's really even no cause for debate. So I think that's a healthy road for us forward, knowing that we are seeking to address the issue. I guess that's all I got.
I apologize that we went over in time, but I do have time to take any questions. '21, and it's going to be in Baltimore this time around. So we'll be able to maybe on the day off go see the Orioles play. So we add a little texture to it. Bill. Yeah. Okay.
Which I gather initially had to do for federal law change. First resolution was football. First resolution.
Oh, press the very bottom. Yeah, at the very bottom.
The bottom part, do I get a light when that happens?
That work better?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Much better. In the original form of this resolution, resolve number 3 states that the blessing of a lifelong relationship shall not be used for mere convenience. It may be used. And the may part, I gather, is these are examples and not limited to. Used one by couples who desire to form or formalize a relationship with one another that is monogamous, unconditional, and lifelong, but is nevertheless something different than a marriage in that it does not include merging of property, finances, or other legal encumbrances. And 2, by couples whom the requirement to furnish identification to obtain a marriage license would result in legal penalties, including deportation because of their immigration status. Now, in the version that was passed, none of that exists. My question is, it is stated in the one that passed, provision will be made for all couples desiring to use the liturgy in their local congregation and worshiping community. Then it also states later, all couples have a convenient and reasonable local congregational access to this right. Okay. The stuff that's covered in the first part, is that actually incorporated in the second part? In other words, if I take up with some woman somewhere and not marry her for whatever reason, whatever it is, I assume this would ultimately land on your desk and you would have to make a decision. But the question is are these all examples that you could use to do something like this that is other than marriage? Is that in fact passed and in effect now?
I have to confess, I don't know what was finally passed. Was that what was concurred upon, that one, last one?
Yes, the
you
last
read?
one is what was.
Because there
concurred
was,
upon.
I know me personally, I had some great reservations with what was originally proposed. Because what that was originally proposed was to allow for two folks to not have to worry about losing pension benefits
understand
and
that.
retirements.
I
And
understand.
likewise, someone who might come from an undocumented status to not have to worry about deposition as the result of,
Yes.
of presenting that.
Yeah.
And I have to plead ignorance on exactly how, what was finally, the effect of what was finally passed. Does any SCLM or anybody else
Oh, you
here?
know? Got any idea, Father? No. The reason I ask this is because out on the web, you know what this is referred to as?
No.
This is the shack up resolution.
The shack up resolution.
Yeah.
Well,
If your question is language from the resolution as initially filed
Yes.
that was removed,
Yes.
is it still effective? The answer is no.
It is not.
The
Okay.
only thing, the resolution that's effective is the final version that was adopted by both the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops.
Okay. So whatever the circumstances would be, would ultimately be up to the bishop to make a decision.
Not necessarily.
I mean, could my rector back here, could he
Well, that's.
go do this on his own? You know, on the spot.
Not everything concerning marriage has to be up to the bishop.
I understand that.
Rectors, priests in charge, vicars, all have canonical responsibilities and that have to follow, including the canonical provision that no priest is required to marry anyone.
Right.
If, period.
If he doesn't want it. Yeah. I understand that. Okay. But I guess my question was, given the original version and its examples of why they were doing that, is that in effect in the final resolution?
No, it's not. It's not part of the final resolution.
Okay.
So.
If I can add that those examples were not the only examples, those were, reasons why.
I understand that. They were merely examples, but my understanding would be not limited to. Yeah, well, of course, in this case, it wouldn't be marriage. It just, I don't even know what do you call it?
Again, I have to claim that I don't have the whole
Would
piece,
it be possible for you to
I
look
can do
into
some
that? Because I would
research,
really like to
absolutely.
know, because it's rather vague.
Yeah, Bill, I think one of the factors that came in with that one as well was that there are parts of the Episcopal Church where same-sex marriage is still not legal, namely in Province 9 and some of the international areas. And I think that had an effect on that as well.
I knew that was the rationale ultimately.
Yeah, I think that was a piece of it. But yeah, I'd be happy to look into that more, because that's a very good question. And I will go ahead and tell you, I have, since I became a bishop, and even when I was a parish priest, I've had requests to bless a relationship between a man and a woman, and to bless that relationship because they didn't want to get married for financial reasons, and for some of the encumbrances.
Okay.
So it's a very good question, and one that your question is not going to be the only one related to that. So let me just put it that way.
Because it was very strange when I read it. I said,
I like the shack up resolution.
That's generally what it's referred to as, the shack up resolution. Okay.
All right.
He said he would hoot at me, so, okay. One last thing, and it's sort of more of a statement, although I would. All the good people that we send up to General Convention, they are in effect the board, if you will, of the church. Now, this diocese.
Yeah.
These are ASA figures. In 2006, it was 7,528. That was average Sunday attendance in 6. And here in 16, which are the last figures we got, it's 5,986. minus 20%. Okay. I do not understand. You know, we keep doing, to me, this is sort of the definition of insanity. We keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, and the numbers continue to drop. I understand that's not the only metric one goes by, but it's a pretty good one.
Yeah. It's probably the most accurate.
Which means a lot of people are not buying the program. What do we do?
Yeah. Well, this is, I don't want to use this as a brush off answer, but across denominations, that's happening. We're seeing a decline. But one of the things I find very hopeful is within that budget that was passed was, I think, 5.8, maybe $6 million towards evangelism and specific church starts, planting, restructuring, restarting, and bolstering of new ministries. And those new ministries are meant to encourage and to reach into communities that we don't typically reach into. You know, for example, into some of the Spanish-speaking communities, also trying to reach into some of the urban areas with creative ministries and such. So I believe there are some very specific things that are being done that are quite a bit different than what we've done in the past. You know, the fact that we've got a mission in Birmingham, Alabama, that's based in a coffee shop. I mean, that's a pretty drastic departure from the architectural evangelism that the Episcopal Church has exercised in years gone by. You know, and I think there are some other pieces being put in place to do that. You know, and some of the racial reconciliation and anti-racism things that Dr. George spoke about also. To me, that reaches in to one of the significant concerns of the next generation. You know, namely, are we really being one? Are we really trying to be one? Are we really trying to be different? So I believe that with this presiding bishop, we are making some pretty significant departures from the way we've done things in the past. And you're right; those ASA numbers should distress us. And you know, just what I used to watch take place in you know, in the churches I served when numbers went down, that's really the best way for us to judge things. We could look at the overall membership, number of baptized people, yada yada yada, but who's butts in seats says a lot.
Interesting to me. I mean, I have the famous bar chart that one can download, you know, that shows this diocese, you know. And of course, the what is that? The blue line, the blue bars, you know, are the baptized bars. The red bars, when the red bars are the only one that really mean anything. Yeah. Okay. But what's interesting is the green line on the very top. That line is going. It's rising. Yeah. Now that's good. And that's obviously less people are paying more money. That's what it means. Now, and that's fine. That means one can continue on a direction. I guess if it's being paid for, you can run it until the green line takes a precipitous drop toward the x-axis. Yeah. So.
Yeah, the green line that Bill's referring to is the plate and pledge. Yeah. You know, and what that would have to indicate as well is that the bulk of the people sitting in our pews are at the maximum point of their earning abilities.
Thank you.
Sure. Ed, you had a question. Good, good. Margaret, and then I'm going to say a prayer and bring us to a close. Yeah, yeah. The alternative, some of the alternative ways of doing business, doing worship, are making a big difference. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious God, when we live and move and have our being, we give thanks for this gathering. We give thanks for this time together. We give thanks for the opportunity to serve and to be your church. Send your blessing upon all of us as we continue to speak of ways and speak of and do our best to share your word in the world. Send your blessing upon our families and friends who sacrificed while we were away at General Convention, and and for the many gifts that we've received through those gatherings. May we continue to find ways to share those gifts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you. And I understand that we didn't have as much the luck that we wanted with the live stream. And any of you that hear from friends at home who meant to watch it, please extend my apologies to them that didn't work out. And I will be getting a proper amends letter out about that shortly. Thank you.